Of the Historic Preservation Commission meeting. Lost my place. We're here tonight to work together with all of you, property owners, neighbors, and architects, to continue the tradition that was established nearly 40 years ago in this community. That tradition is a review process that allows community members to work together to preserve the qualities and unique character that make Lake Forest a special community. City of Lake Forest is committed to conducting open and democratic meetings, and to achieve that goal, meeting procedures have been adopted by the Commission. A copy of the procedures is available at the back of the room on each agenda. As always, it's the intent of the Commission to help manage the development and the growth of the City of Lake Forest with a keen sense of preserving the historic structures and open space in the city for its present and future residents. Our goal is to move each petition before us tonight through the review process as quickly as possible while balancing the interests of the petitioners, neighboring property owners, and the larger community. So we'll start the meeting as we always do with the introduction of the commissioners. That's you.
Robert Elfie.
Susan Atkinson.
John Travers.
Kurt Peretz.
Mary Ellen Swenson.
Jim Preschlag.
All right, excellent. And we have tonight the pleasure of honoring our past commissioner, Bill Ransom, who was commissioner on this board from 2010 to spring of this year, so about 4 years. In this time, we heard over 120 residential and commercial petitions, and some of the larger projects were the Ellowa Farm renovations, the train station renovations, which probably we heard numerous times, the Forest Park and Market House renovations, and the list goes on and on. We appreciate the thoughtful and steady input that Bill had. It was a pleasure to work with, and I think everybody would concur with that. He had a good, really nice ability to weigh both the abstract design issues with the real-world execution challenges, and really appreciate having the chance to work with you, Bill. Do we have something? Yeah? Look at that. Does he get this?
Oh,
Come on up, Bill.
he gets his nameplate. Wow.
I'm not sure what you're doing with that.
I have a couple of things. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
You sure you don't want to stay?
There's an empty chair if you like.
You need to.
Thanks, Bill. All right. We also have some minutes, I believe, for approval. Let me just take a look here, and I'll tell you what they are. We've got proceeding minutes from the May 28th meeting as well as the July 10th meeting. I'll ask if anyone has comments. If we do, we could do them separately, or we can do them at once. What's your pleasure? Any comments?
Nope. Okay.
I have no comments.
No comments? All right, well, I'll ask if there's a motion to approve both minutes.
So moved.
And there's a motion by Commissioner Preschlag. Is there a second? Seconded by Commissioner Swenson. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We have minutes. Excellent. All right, our first petition is a consideration for a request for certificate of appropriateness approving the second phase of the restoration project for Market Square and associated buildings. Project includes minor masonry, cleaning, repair of windows, replacement of double hung windows, second floor, blah, 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 and on and on. You're going to tell us all about that. So come on up and introduce yourself, and I'll ask if anybody has any conflict. I'm not sure how you could. All right, good. Thanks.
Hi, my name is Eileen Shobe. I was before you a few months ago with OKW Architects. I have with me tonight one of the owners, Michael Schreiber, a fellow partner at our firm, Mike Fitzgerald, who was born a Lake Forestian and haunts these areas a lot. Our historic preservation consultant, Ann McGuire from McGlusky McGuire, and Joe Percunier from my office as well, who's been helping on a lot of these documents. Do we have any conflict of interest, or I'm ready to go? Okay, perfect. So, as you can see, we've already started to do the masonry repair, stucco repair, and we're on to the windows and also the Marshall Fields building, addressing that phase as well. What you'll see here is we are going to go to the same scope that we were before you a few months ago, but we are addressing the wood trim and the windows, specifically the windows from the second floor area. We're still trying to work out exactly what we're going to do with the storefront, as the storefront has many different layers and is a little more difficult to deal with. But the second floor is perfect while we're up with the scaffolding, and we like to address those areas for full restoration. The first slide was in your packet, is kind of addressing the different window types that exist on the building. We are proposing to do a full restoration of all of the special detail windows that you see in the towers, all of the kind of fixed elements, because they're easy to kind of get into, repair, and also provide an additional layer of glass behind them, specifically on the fixed layers. The double hung windows that you will see here are throughout the second floor, and unfortunately, because they're double hung and they're in the office space, they are used quite a bit. Their workings are going in and out. Some are in better states of repair than others. Some are barely holding on, and I think there's only putty and part of the lights as opposed to actually some wood. If we show here on these pictures, so what we've came up with is a couple ways of going about the double hung windows. They are the ones that are getting the most use. They are also the ones that most of the people in the office use. We looked at potentially putting another insulated piece of glass, but the existing windows are so narrow that another pane of glass would not work in the frame and still be operable. We still like folks to be able to open the windows, especially when the weather is like today. So we came up with some options of putting a new storm sash behind here to create another level from an insulation standpoint. However, that is not as attractive for the end user on the inside, and also relies on someone to remember to close those sashes and remember to close the windows as well to get the energy efficiency, and also to keep the wear and tear that's happening from them because people are leaving the windows open or there's not a tight seal and the water sits and creates a problem. So we've looked at providing an all-wood replacement windows for these workhorse kind of double hungs that, in essence, the shape and design are pretty much basically what you've seen throughout all of the Chicago area. Very standard trim and style that could easily be reproduced in a modern manner so that we can get the triple glazing, the double glazing, the E value, the ease of use, and the ease of maintenance with screens, etc., without cluttering up the exterior that we have now, that has the very poorly done storms on the outside, which we'd be taking down. Some images over here are how we would restore some of the windows, and these are images of how bad the deterioration has gotten on some of the windows, as well as what the replacement window would look like. We are pricing both at the moment and have many reputable firms coming to look at it, and at the moment it's leaning towards these double hungs. The best work for them is to do a replacement. Again, this is only the typical double hungs, not the special standard casements that are part of the design of the space. The next phase that we're going to do is just some minor masonry restoration to what everyone calls the Marshall Fields building. In general, it's in fairly decent shape. It's just a light clean on a lot of the sandstone, limestone that we have out there, as well as some areas that we're getting some tuck pointing concerns, specifically by weathering areas of the downspouts and gutters and some of the details up at the roof where water tends to leak in. We would be doing a restoration of the existing casements, as well as producing the storm windows that used to be there that swung out, replicating those and putting them back on the facade so that we get the double pane in these windows. And these casements here, these double hungs here, we'd be looking at either replacing them or restoring them. We're still not fully done vetting what is going to be the best condition, but these are in a little better shape than the rest of the square. The next thing that goes along with the restoration of the trim is painting them. We've done a lot of work, exhaustive, on taking samples. We dug up the files from Vinci that in the 80s presented to you a color scheme that you now see on the building. And we hired Historic Surfaces to go out and take a lot more, and with the aid of a lift and scaffolding, get at spots that may be very difficult to get, and maybe more of the original paint color than would have been if you just went up with a ladder. What we found is a slight range of colors because, of course, back then they didn't have the Benjamin Moore push the button and shake it all up. So you tend to see a light and a dark range in the colors. But from what you can see up front, we've actually given you the actual colors because, of course, trying to get my computer to look like your computer and look like your screen is difficult. So we're passing around, basically it's still the same 3-color scheme, But the green is a little bit more on a green side, not so blue, not so 80s blue, which maybe it was the 80s when they were looking at the colors and kind of thought that that was a nice look. The white is more of an off-white, which actually makes a better harmony. What you can see in the black and white, some of the contrast is not as sharp as what you see now with that green and the white. So it's a slightly off-white, as well as some of the colors were a darker white, and we represent to kind of pop the bay windows with a two-tone look, so you can see the trim work. The browns is very similar. It's a little warmer, a little richer, and overall we think that the color palette for the second floor is a little more elegant and reflects kind of more what a historic paint palette would have been, as opposed to the way it's being painted now. The two little samples you see there are the closest we could get to the paints that are out there. Some are slightly green and some are slightly blue. I think it depends on the age of when, if they've been recently painted or if they've faded over time. And this is just a quick slide to show where we are going to put the three base colors. The darker color green you see here is found in the Marshall Fields building. It's actually painted that right now, and that actually is very close to the historic color we were able to determine underneath. We also found this in a few doors and storefronts along the base, and we're still trying to figure out exactly where those colors are used in more detail. We're still doing some more sampling on the 1890s buildings, the Griffith Block and its neighbor. It's been a little harder to find more intact paint. We're getting really nice samples for the lower level, but not the upper level. We're pretty sure this is going to end up being the brown that we're using everywhere else. It's these bay windows we're still trying to clarify. We feel that they shouldn't mimic the Shaw building because they were built before it, and they may need to want to have their own identity and have a slightly different kind of color green or white to kind of accent that facade, and not just paint it all one color because the Shaw building has that color. As you see in front of you, you've got a larger swath if you'd like to take a look there, but I think the samples are quite helpful. And I think I am finished.
All right. thank
Sorry
you.
I spoke so fast. The 10 minutes
That's all right.
always gets me a little shaken up.
All right, let's see if we have a staff report.
Not much of one. Thank you, Chairman Peretz. You do see the work underway right now. I will say that the city is receiving a lot of compliments. There's a lot of interest in the project. We've heard comments like we've never seen scaffolding that's so elegant. There continues to be really great communication, whether it's on the graphics that are out there right now or the research that they're doing. I think what you're seeing is a real true effort to restore Market Square. You do have a letter from the Preservation Foundation really encouraging restoration of the original windows. I think that with the quality of the team that L3 has put together, certainly from the staff perspective, we have a lot of confidence that if those double hung windows can be restored, they will be restored. But we also think it's reasonable to give some latitude that if the determination is that they are too deteriorated and they cannot be functional, that they be restored, since they really are standard double hung windows. Certainly all of the very unique windows will be restored appropriately. You do have in the staff report a recommendation in support of a certificate of appropriateness, and we will continue to work with L3 and their team and bring you back later phases of this project. Thank you.
Thanks, Kathy. All right, now's an opportunity for commissioners to ask questions of either the petitioner or the staff. Go ahead.
I just had a question regarding the potential replacement windows. I noticed some of them seem to have very narrow stiles and buttons. Are you finding there's a manufacturer that'll make that?
Yes, we've actually
Profile.
had a couple manufacturers come out and look at the windows. Specifically right now, we've had Loa, Pell, and Marvin, and we've also had at least 3 or 4 restoration contractors come out. And with the aid of the scaffolding, it's been very helpful to really look at the few windows we could look at before in the offices that were easy to get to. There was some disrepair, but I also think that they had been worked on more recently. And as we get around the facade, we're noticing like major deterioration, especially on the side that faces a lot of the trees and the and the windows. But we have been working with them. The manufacturers we're looking for, their simulated divided lights have a bar on both sides, wood and a air gap, so that it creates a shadow. And actually Lowen Windows, which is one of the people we used as our base to help start the bidders looking at things, has one of the best sight lines and also does a narrow putty joint instead of a larger look. They have multiple looks you can come from, and they'll do the custom sizes we need. So these will be actually custom made for us, and we'll be reviewing their shops and their measurements. But they're one of the companies that do this quite a bit. And actually one of the images you saw in the presentation is from one of their historic replacements. So these are actually historic replacements directly from Lowen. It may not necessarily be Lowen, but we're looking for that quality of work and doing an all-wood window with at least a Douglas fir base as a minimum, which is better than a pine that you see in most commercial windows. So the Douglas fir has a much stronger strength and also is a lot easier to stain if folks decide to stain it. So it's like a slower growth tree. So the wood itself is fairly strong, maybe not as strong as the old growth original, but one of the key wood windows that you would choose if you were going to start fresh.
So the profiles are such that you wouldn't be able to tell the difference in the old ones restored from.
Correct.
the
That's
new
one of the reasons why we went this way, because if you take a look at the windows that are there, they're very utilitarian, kind of double hung. You see them all over the place. They weren't anything very specific, or they're not like the casement windows, which have a really nice detail and still work beautifully. They operate quite nice. Michael has them in his office, and they're a pleasure to open and use. The double hungs seem to be because they're kind of in these utilitarian apartment areas that they just put something in that a typical residential kind of piece was built in. Also, what we're finding is it was a developer project, and even though it was a Howard Van Doren Shaw project, I think sometimes there were things done to make sure that the building was done in time. We're finding that some of the flashings are actually not copper, they've been tin, and they're really starting to corrode as we start to pull masonry and brick off, which was kind of shocking on our end because that era it wasn't done. So we're wondering sometimes if they've decided in a few spots to just take a little bit of a, we need to save some money on the project, and it's in the double hungs.
But these are, the originals are true divided light.
Correct.
And you're going to simulated divided
We're
light.
going to do simulated divided light
That
so
would
that
work.
we can
Why
get
not
the
true
energy
divided light?
efficiency.
Why wouldn't you restore or replace with true divided light?
I think because one of the benefits of doing a replacement is to get that energy efficiency to move for the next 50 years, and the true divided light, you don't get as much of a benefit as the simulated divided light. And from an economic standpoint of trying to do the major restoration on the unique elements, it's a good way to get the look from, because they're on the second floor, the shadow lines and the images that we see we'll feel will be, in keeping with what we need, because they're not right at the general public's ground level. So that's why we went with the simulated divided lights. Lowen makes a beautiful one, and other manufacturers are doing the same thing where they have the spacer bar that's metallic that creates the shadow line. So it's a very hard thing to see from the ground level, whether you actually have a true or a simulated.
But is that compromising the historical integrity of these buildings, though, if you're changing true divided light to simulated?
I think what we're doing is we're trying to honor the design intent, but also to bring the project to, the current energy requirements that are out there in the world. And it's not necessarily a museum that we're creating. It's a working building that we'd like to extend for more time. So we felt that this is the area that, whether it was simulated or true divided light, it wouldn't impact the historic content of what Van Doren Shaw was looking to create.
Can
you
I
have
can
a
I ask
comment
a
on
question?
Well, I'd say as a
So could you come on up if you're going to talk?
My name is
Thanks.
Ann McGuire, the firm is McGuire at Westing Associates, and we have been consulting to the team
and have looked at the windows for restoration. And we have given the names of many of the contractors who do window restoration to them for consideration. And so I think what Eileen is describing is trying to find a balance between the cost of the restoration versus the cost of a new window and the energy efficiency of one versus the other. I will say new windows with true divided lights at each pane of glass would not be able to maintain that narrow sight line. And so I think the intention is to suggest to you a replacement window that would meet the sight lines of the existing window so that it has that appearance. I do agree that there is the potential to look at, as you see in this drawing here, of interior secondary storms and window restoration, but I think this is something that has to be seen in terms of the overall project and what is affordable. I mean, I know the slate roof is a huge endeavor right now, and the masonry is another, and I think the concern is to do work that will ensure that the building stays weather tight and continues to be used.
So you don't think that'll impact the historic integrity of the building?
I think that, well done, it will not. I mean, they will be new, but they're looking at replacing wood for wood. These are not metal clad or some other such thing. And I think you can see, or staff can see, profiles of the existing sightlines to proposed sightlines as a comparison so that you can understand that. But I do understand and I'm sympathetic with their need to, in the shoulder seasons, operate these windows. And so there's been a lot of discussion of, where the screens would go and if there's interior storms and the pros and cons of them. And so I think we're trying to find a compromise that continues to sort of preserve the overall special features of this site, but understands that this is an occupied building on all floors.
Can I ask a question real quick? Because I think this is important, but I think it's more important, I think, to get a bigger picture on the whole project and not just on the windows. So I was going to ask if you could just take some time, and you could even use the whiteboard here to draw, but just think about the major elements and the scope of the project and try to bucket them into historical integrity and restoration versus replacement and improvement, so we can get a balanced view of the totality of the project and where you're putting the money and what the trade-offs are. And I have a hard time just getting my head around the big picture issues first.
Right.
And then I think we can drill down and have conversations on each component. As I heard you speak, it seemed like the masonry and the Marshall Field work was restoration, but I don't want to put words in your mouth. I'd like you to use whoever you have on your team to tell me these are the 6 or 7 major areas of work. These are restoration, these are improvement and efficiency, and here's why we're doing it. And I think after you do that, I think I need to get a little bit more comfortable on what you're using as a guide for historical integrity. And then I think we can go from there to drill down.
Well, we presented a few months ago the majority, basically right now, the only element that we have not touched on is the storefronts. From what you've seen in our last 2 presentations is everything that we're doing to the major front facades and the roofs of the Market Square buildings. I can speak that we are restoring everything except for looking at the double hungs as a replacement. And we haven't completely finished the storefront guide because right now the storefronts have a multitude of historic, you have some original copper, some cast iron, some wood, some 60s aluminum, 50s aluminum, modern, and we're trying to figure out the best play for what we are going to do with kind of the storefront elements. But as you see right now, everything on those major squares, the only thing we're talking about besides storefront, and storefront would definitely be some replacement because there is a lot of non-historic pieces, so there's definitely going to be a balance of having to replace and restore when we talk about the storefront. So if we take the storefronts aside, on these front facades and the front roof, we are actually restoring in kind, and we were replacing the slate roof because it's a 100-year roof and it's a 100-year-old. So we're replacing it with slate. All of the existing windows, except for the double hungs, we are restoring. All of the masonry, we're retucking and restoring it to its true mortar. Right now, there's a lot of bad tuck pointing that wasn't matched and was just buttered on. We are restoring that. We are bringing the stucco back to its original intent. We found over time there's many multiple layers of paint that is completely incorrect. We're completely taking that off and refacing it as it should be. So overall, the picture that we're asking for in terms of replacement is where we think has the less historic impact and matches the sight lines of the original design, which we feel that is probably the thing that we need to keep more in keeping. So it looks like the original design, because we tried to look at reglazing them with a double glaze and they are so thin it will not work. And if we do a true divided light, they will not match the look that was there before. And I feel that that is probably, speaking of the architect and how he designed it, that's going to make these look heavy, and that was never the intent. So if that helps you understand what we're doing in terms of replacement versus restoration, I think it's a very minimal. It's just a small amount of the overall facades.
Thank you.
On a second floor, a true divided light window versus a simulated, especially on a second floor, when the sun reflects, it's immediately noticeable, and you can immediately tell the difference between the two to the naked eye.
I would say it depends on the manufacturer of the window. I've seen really horrible simulated divided lights, and you can tell them right away. It's because they didn't do a proper spacer bar, and they didn't paint the color of the spacer bar like a shadow line.
Well, I notice it just with the unevenness of the glass. Either you feel like it's a flat plane, or you feel like each individual glass is placed slightly differently, so you get sort of a wavy
Oh,
look
so
at the
you get the
glass.
little bit of the wavy effect.
You don't feel like it's just one plain sheet of glass. What is the difference in the energy efficiency between the two? Is it a huge difference? I mean, are we talking?
It's a fairly huge difference because we're talking about the existing single pane glass, and in this window, the wood, I haven't actually run the calculations of what the original would be, but the profile of the existing window, there's not a lot of wood left when you putty it. So basically what you have is just a sheet of glass as your major opening to that space. Plus the gaps around the sides, that an original window that doesn't have the integral weather stripping in the slides, you get a lot of jiggle, you get a lot of movement. So when you stand in front of them, when I was there in the winter, you can feel the heat. And also what's happening is there's a fair amount of condensation that's occurring on the inside of the window because it's so cold. And the way this building is designed, there's not a way to get the air blowing on those windows to help with the condensation. So you will see a lot of deterioration on the inside and the outside from the condensation that builds up on the glass because the original glass does not have the qualities that a new glass has now to help reflect the light if needed and to keep the inside of the window from condensation buildup, which then is, one of the major problems on existing windows.
So what you're saying is you don't know the difference in the energy efficiencies.
I know that
numbers and the percentages.
I did not actually run the numbers just from understanding of existing windows and where these new windows meet the highest level of the energy code, which is a quite hard thing to do. You have to get the argon glass, you have to get the right glass, you have to have the right glazing. Not every window that's manufactured will actually meet the rigorous Illinois energy code requirements.
So all of the windows that are blue, those are all the original windows? Are non-historic?
Correct. The blue are the historic double hung. We are replacing some non-historic windows that you see in the Griffith block because those were replaced probably, they're cheap wood vinyl combinations that were done probably in the 60s or 70s. Those are the red.
A picture of that elevation.
It's this right here. And if you want to see a photo of that area, it's these windows right here.
Thanks.
So we're going to do a replacement of a wood window because right now it's a non-historic wood window that was put in. That's a poorly done installation. The blue windows that you saw in your packet here
There it is.
are the historic double hungs that we would look at replacing. The green, the yellow, and the orange are historic windows we're restoring.
May I ask a question? Sure, please. So I was wondering if I could ask just a few quick questions. How many of these historic double-hung windows are there that you're proposing to replace?
I believe the count is, and I'd have to double check, I think the last count was, it's over, well, they're in pairs. I think it's 94. I know we have the original count because we were looking at the bid numbers, and that number pops in my head, and I actually have never physically counted them all, but it's
So I
quite
estimated it as
substantial.
100. Is that about right?
Yes, I think the
And,
number
this
I'm
is on
remembering is
both the
94.
north and the south side
Correct.
facing the court.
Facing the court, correct.
And so these are all essentially all the windows on the second story facing the court.
There are a majority of the windows, correct.
And
This excludes the clock tower, the casement windows that are unique in their configuration, or the French doors on the clock tower or on the Marshall Fields building.
yep.
Correct, yes. If you look at the square, the Marshall Fields, that whole front facade is all restoration.
Exactly. So about 100 windows here we're talking about?
Yes, I believe the number might be 94, but I wouldn't.
Right. And so what's the primary driver for replacement? Is it condition or thermal factors?
I would say it's a combination of both. It's a condition, it's the usability for the end user, and the ability of the windows to stand up for another. We're trying to restore this building so it stays active and is vibrant, and we want something that's going to last another 30 or 40 years. So it's condition, usability, because besides restoring them, all of the working movements have to be repaired and replaced as well. All of the glass has to be taken out and reputtied. And the thermal is a very large component, because one of our goals internally is to potentially have a historic building that could potentially meet LEED requirements for something of that use. So it's something we take seriously. It's also the second level where most of the office work is happening, where the thermal break is something of major concern as opposed to more of a retail use. So I would say it's a combination of both. As we go around, what we're seeing is the windows are in worse shape than we originally thought as we put this first scaffolding up and we did a walk. I honestly was quite shocked at some of the states of the windows and thought, my goodness, there's not much left of this window by the time we take it out and sand it down. And it was literally putty that was holding it together.
If I can interject, I think that what might help the situation would be for you to have maybe the information to understand how good a match, a replacement window can be to a double hung window that is not that unique in its profiles. So I think it's perhaps a demonstration of matching the sight lines and matching the profiles so that you can feel comfortable with that as an option.
So are you prepared to do that? I mean, I think frankly, we're jumping ahead. It's the Q&A portion of the session, but I'll just jump ahead. It's a great project. You guys are obviously working hard on it, and we appreciate that. We love that you're getting great staff report. We're only giving you what for on Windows because it's our job.
Yeah.
So we're interested in protecting the integrity of the landmark, and windows are an important attribute of it. So, and what's hard for us is that the request is not very specific with respect to the windows. It seems like the proposal is to replace all the second-story windows other than the one at the clock tower and the Marshall Fields windows,
Correct.
right? So let's not, that's.
I think when we originally were putting the package together, we were still researching if we could restore versus replace. And when I talked to Kathy, said, you know what, just be honest and present both options. And by the time you get here, you may know more about what's happening. Part of it was waiting for the scaffold. Part of it was waiting for quotes from window restoration folks to actually tell us what they could do and how they could do it. And in all honesty, that's why the package kind of has this conflicting
So
request.
do you know today, I mean, without giving up the ghost, you probably haven't made an award yet, but do you know what window you're preferred to go with and how you're going to do this? And the reason I ask the question is because we'd like to specifically know, will there be screens, will there not be screens? Are the frames going to be removed and replaced, or are they going to be, packed out and panned and put new windows in a smaller opening? Those are very important things to us.
Correct.
And so we appreciate the diagnosis of whether it's a true divided light or not a true divided light, and how you make the mullion work and how you don't make the, and those are details that we love to see the actual product and understand how you're actually going to, you're asking us to approve something, 100 windows on the #1 landmark in the city of Lake Forest, and we just want to know what the heck we're approving, and so far we
Correct.
don't know. I mean, we love what you're doing, we just don't know what you're asking for on the windows.
I would say that as it stands now, after our kind of latest walk with the scaffolding, we're leaning towards, we would definitely like to do replacements. We are finding that a fair amount of the windows, especially on the north side where the scaffolding, are in seriously bad condition. And the discussions we've had with the window manufacturers is that they can manufacture, they've been on site, they've looked at the windows, they can manufacture the sight lines. We would be leaving the existing trim and putting in the existing windows in the same opening. We're not going to pad them out to get them installed. They've looked at them and have given us this is doable, whether we have to go from the inside or the outside, but it's how we would like to install them. We're not going to pad them out so they look different, because that would be a larger, thicker sight line that we had originally proposed.
I think you're talking about sash replacement, or you pull the sash and you put a new window and frame within, and so you keep having a frame within a frame within a frame, and it's panned over, and that is not
Correct. That is not our intent. Our intent is to replace.
place at all.
Instead of pulling the window out and completely restoring it, we would take the window out and it would be new, but it would match the sight lines, be a simulated divided light with the double glazing that a modern window could be. It would be a wood window, Douglas fir minimum, and would match the sight lines. And we would be getting a mock-up of exactly what we are going to install. And if there was some concern about, well, you're going to replace it and we don't know how you're going to replace it, we've been more than happy to get, that information so that folks can put their hands on it and see that what we're saying is actually what indeed is going to happen.
Okay. Now let's see if there's any other questions before we get into
did have-
the
I
have some
presentation. Please,
questions.
go ahead.
Do you have more? Or,
Yeah, of
why don't I
course. I always
finish
have
up?
more,
Okay. So I just wanted to finish up. So this is so essentially then your proposal is to replace all 100 or so, 94 of the historic double-hung windows.
Correct.
On both the north and south part of Market Square.
Market Square.
Taking out the, and are all those presently, those are primarily all still the original windows?
For the most part, from what we could see at the time, they seem to be original. It's hard to tell unless you're up there with the scaffolding to really get a good view. We did go up with a lift originally to kind of figure out and then look at a few offices from behind. There are storms that are on there that are horrible, and we're taking those off. Those are coming off. They're just vinyl, aluminum, really awful.
Are those the interior storms?
These are exterior storms. They're currently, if I don't know if you could see it in this picture I just took, this is the sill, this is the original, this is a bad replacement storm, not sure when it was done. And this is the profile of kind of the bottom sash. This is typical of what we're finding where we have the scaffolding right now, that it's severely deteriorated, especially at the sill. And what was scary to me was these very thin profile joints. I saw like a sliver of wood. It was just all putty.
Nice.
And it was poorly puttied at that.
So it's going to be all of the windows, it's going to be 94 windows. It's an all or nothing proposition from your standpoint. You're not just going to take out the most deteriorated ones, or you're going to take them all out and replace them with efficient.
I think to be on the safe side, we would say all of them. Because I wouldn't want to say we're going to try to restore some and we end up not restoring any of them. So I think in terms of an approval, it would probably be wise of me to say yes, we were going to replace all of them. That's not to say that potentially maybe we can leave, if we find some that are in better shape, maybe just leave a few so that they're there for posterity's sake. But I think the intent is that where we're leaning from what we found in this last week is that we would replace them all.
So you think you might leave a few for posterity's sake?
I think it's something that we would definitely be open to do, yes.
Can
And
you
if
just,
I could-
I'm sorry, can you comment a little bit on just the search so far for matching windows, especially the sight lines, and how easy it is? I think you had mentioned that it is fairly easy. Just curious how many, high-quality windows that you would think would
I've met
serve.
with the low-end rep, the Pella rep was out as well. We're still looking at other manufacturers to come in to kind of take a look. I've worked with Lowen on the past on other kind of, not as historically sensitive, but trying to match an historic look, and they have a really good quality window in terms of the wood. Since we're doing an all-wood window, it wants to be a high-quality window because it needs to last. And so we started out with kind of the higher level ends, and at the time they've met and they said, these are just very typical, very easy to meet with the simulated divided lights because it's a very narrow putty joint.
So is it a make-to-order situation where they're kind of fairly customized to the spaces?
Correct.
Or
Well,
is
these
it
would
off the
have to
shelf?
be custom windows because of the sizes, and also they would have to match the divided light pattern. So it would be the same exact pattern, the same dimensions, the height of the sash, the height of the frame. So, and what I've heard so far is that this is not going to be a problem for many of those manufacturers to do.
And the advantage of having a custom size like this is that you don't end up with them using a standard and shimming it in. And again, I think we're keenly aware of trying to match sight lines so that the glass area of the replacement window would be the same as that of the existing. So you're not creeping in and having a smaller glass area.
Are there examples of successful replacements within any of the structure that is in scope of the project?
That's there now?
Yeah, that maybe during the 80s or 90s, or someone just kind of beat you to it, and instead
I
of
think there
restoring,
might,
they repaired.
I know they come in and do a little bit of work on some of the offices on replacing the pulls and the chains. It's hard to tell because they're painted how much of it is original or not. We haven't had a chance to really see all of them from the exterior, which is where it gives it away as opposed to the interior.
In terms of replacement, I'd say the replacement windows that are there now are inferior and not matching and are failing. So we have some in there that were probably an inexpensive window, and that is primarily at the two buildings at the north end of Northwestern Avenue, not the Shaw buildings, and over in what is known as Left End, which is not.
Correct. Those are
which is
really
not quite
easy.
nice.
Yeah, those are very easy to spot. The ones that are in the Shaw building itself, we're still kind of peeling back the envelope to see what we can see. And some of what we see it kind of shakes you up a little bit. And some of what you see is encouraging.
Can you describe the existing windows a little more? Are there chains or ropes?
Some of them have been changed. Some of them have been changed with ropes. There's been modern hardware put in and off. The few offices I've been to have an assortment of interior. Some seem to be original, some are not original.
But the sash itself is a very standard,
Yes.
multiple light over multiple light with, wooden stops, parting stops. There's really not much
So what do
unique
you-
to it
oh, sorry.
from the point of view of a design element. The brick mold or the trim is fairly standard, and I agree with Eileen that these are profiles and features that can be had in a replacement window.
So are you proposing a polished brass or a polished nickel? What is your hardware situation going to look like?
I think what we see right now is it's all polished. The pieces I've seen are polished brass, and we would match that intent. It's hard to say how much of it has been replaced over time, but I know there was a lot of renovations done in the 80s with some of the infills, so it's hard to tell how much of the hardware was taken off when they might have repaired some of the windows. I think most of that work was on the back sides as
It's a
opposed to the
medium
it's a
rail lock and
standard
air
thumb turn,
hose.
yes.
That's it on the interior.
It's probably as typical as you could get for a very, yeah. When I first saw them, I was surprised. I didn't think they matched the quality of the casements. And I thought they were replacements that someone had put in between. And then the more we started looking at them, they're not. But when they were put in, they were not the best window that they were putting in there in terms of quality in 1917.
Other questions?
Yeah, I'm just, excuse me, I'm curious what you think about the Preservation Foundation's recommendation to contract restoration works. Because did you read this?
Yes, I did. Right before we started, we actually have reached out to 3 to 4 restoration. We've been actually asking for more because a few people have not been inclined to give us a bid. And part of it, it's the time of the year it is. We have reached out. I know we have 3 bids from full restoration companies that Anne has recommended to work with in the past. And I'm trying to remember if they've actually provided a number to us. I believe they have. So we have reached out to restoration contractors and had them walk the space to give us their thoughts, give us their ideas on how we'd have to do it. And pretty much all of them are saying, that I've heard so far, is we have to completely take the window out, board the window up, and bring them back to the shop for major restoration work. It's not a simple, we can fix a few of these things in the field.
Yeah, because this actually says remilling the original windows to accept new insulating glass.
We looked at this window. It's not deep enough. This window, if you can see in this image, it is tiny. The first thing we did is, can we put in and grind out and put insulated glass in? We looked and we were like, oh my goodness, there's barely enough room for the single pane of glass that's in here. It is tiny. So that was our first thing. The other thing we started talking about is, can we put something on the exterior? And then we're like, well, that's not going to look good because now we're closing up because then that would help keep the old wood in better condition, but then that's not appropriate to the way it's looking now. That's the bad storms that are on there now that are actually occluding you from being able to see the view. They have a screen and a glass, and most of them, the screen is, I'm not sure where, but it's letting water in and just letting water sit. So the next thing we looked at is, could we put an insulating piece of glass? It's a very thin profile in the inside as well. The window is very close to the edge of the sill and the plaster. So there's not a lot of room for this insulating window, which is an aluminum system to kind of create that energy efficiency that a tenant would like when they're going into these spaces, especially the bays that are just all window.
Interior storm.
So the interior storm. So we came up with this detail to help us with pricing and exploration, and we did very detailed drawings. Then we sent out to multiple contractors. We specified a replacement and a restoration and had multiple folks come and walk the space, get up on the scaffolding, and really give us some hard numbers on what they think they can do. And that's why we're saying today that we're looking at replacement, just based on the comments from these folks who have walked it with us and talked about the process, and feeling that what we really need to do here is replace and get the energy efficiency and move on and use what we need to do on these historic windows, the clock tower windows, the cupola windows, really fine tune and save those, and not spend all this extraneous effort on these very, very simple, I would say that these were like the Home Depot windows of 1917 that are there now.
Now you've disparaged both developers and homeowners.
And I'm sorry for that, but it's shocking because the individual windows that they've done that you can tell are custom are beautifully done. And so I think it was kind of this balance of them saying, hey, these are just the double hung windows and they need to disappear. So we did a lot of research and analysis and drawings and detailing, myself and Anne, kind of trying to come up with how we could handle these windows. And this is why I think when you saw our presentation, you were a little confused. You show restoration and you show replacement, as we were still kind of working through where we may end up.
Let's see if there's any other questions.
I just had a question about the shutters. Because you had mentioned the shutters. So what are you doing with the shutters? Are you...
The shutters will stay and they'll be fully restored.
I'm not replacing.
We're not replacing them. We don't intend to replace them. We may actually put some of the shutters that have been removed back up. We're still researching exactly how that works. And on the Marshall Fields building, we are going to replace the storms that are missing, that were the full casements that match, that swung out and the ones swing in. So we're doing a lot of replacing of historic elements that have been taken off.
Can you
And we
walk us
feel
through
that that's the most important thing to do with this building, is to focus on those elements as opposed to something that is a very simple element that, that is not integral to what the kind of feel of the Market Square is from a historic standpoint.
So
Walk us-
also with the, are you restoring the, I know we're just focusing on windows here, but I noticed there's so many plaques and there's sculptures up there on the second floor.
The sculptures are in very good shape. There are a lot of plaster work that we talked about when we were here 3 months ago, and a majority of that plaster is in fairly good shape, just had some patching on it. There's a few that as we get up are very deteriorated. We may take elements of those and recast them to put them back in, but a majority of that is all restoration work. There's a few on the north side, which I think gets weathering from the trees that are up there that are practically falling off of the stucco facade as we get closer and kind of touch and find that it's crumbling. But a majority of them are in decent shape. The two sculptures and the plaques are in very good shape. Okay. And so we would just be coming in, peeling and stripping off all the old paint, because there's a series of areas where people have just painted over bad scrapings. And so we're trying to get rid of that and get down to a really good quality finish on the paint. And any damaged areas we would just replace in kind. But for the most part, the wood it's quite a substantial size, the detailing of the wood, so that's helped it. So a majority of it is in fairly decent shape. It just has bad layers of paint on it, 100 years of nobody really kind of taking care of it correctly in terms of the painting.
And you also mentioned something about the doors.
The doors that go to the second level, those would be existing to stay, and what we're proposing to do, since we're presenting the colors for the upper floor, is just temporarily paint the lower so we don't get a clash of blues and greens. And then when we figure out the storefronts, we'll come back and do the full restoration. The doors that lead to the second floor, we're restoring those. We're not replacing those.
Because some of them have different windows on the doors.
That was on purpose. If you look at some of it's on purpose, some of it's not. If you look at his design, he liked to play little kind of changes in the building to make it look like it had kind of been there a little longer or grew organically. So a lot of those doors to the second floor are all very different. They have a different transom design, a different cast iron base design, and the more you walk around and look at it, the more you see the images. I know Mike Fitzgerald here at our office, who's very into kind of studying the history of it, he's constantly reading more and saying, oh my gosh, did you know that he put his initials HS inscribed into the bank shield if you look really close. When we got up on the scaffolding, we found that those little pieces that are coming down off the top actually have a 4-dimensional heart carved into them when you're up close. It's hard to see now because it's all full of paint, but he did a lot of little different elements across the facade so nothing looks exactly the same.
You should try going to Ragdale. They have the same things there.
Yeah, so it's quite a unique discovery. So a lot of things that you think are older are actually on the original drawings. We have photos, and what you see on the scaffolding are some of his original drawings. We're finding they're not exactly accurate because he's changed his mind. They're probably permit drawings, I would suppose, and what was actually built.
And I'll just interject when you mentioned Ragdale, but Tony Cartsonis of Historic Services is the one who did the paint analysis that you see here tonight, and he did it for Ragdale as well.
Oh, great.
So
Yeah,
he was able to bring that knowledge to
Great.
what he was looking at here today.
Correct.
So do those paint colors vary from what John Vinci recommended in
Yes.
1980?
What you can see on that board right in front of you is what he recommended based on his, I know we contacted them and contacted them. They pulled up their information.
Well, and it was great because they were so willing to share their information, and they pulled their files. And I had a conversation with Phil Hamp from their office. But what they did was they looked at them with the naked eye
at their office. They did not send it out for analysis. So I think, and also, as Tony has mentioned, that when you are, for each color, he sampled numerous locations and developed a family and saw the range of color because it was site mixed. So it's understandable that what we're showing you is one color after looking at maybe a half a dozen of a range that he found. And so it's possible that what Vinci's office saw was just, one area of one part of it, but I also think that they were looking at it with the naked eye and matching it to what paints were available in the 80s, and so.
So as an
the
architect,
case.
I'll ask Eileen. Eileen?
Yes, Eileen.
What difference am I going to perceive if I'm a shopper in Market Square before and after, in terms of this? Just talk about the paint colors.
For the paint colors, I think what you're going to see is one of the things that struck me when I was up here is the blue to me did not feel that, from what I'm aware of, and I do a lot of work with historic, it was my minor when I was at UVA, I just love that it didn't feel to me as authentic as what it should be. The color seemed a little strange. And the contrast with the white seemed very severe for what, the kind of elegant and simple things that Howard Van Shaw was known for. So it seemed to me kind of that the blue at the time would have been a really kind of garish color a little bit. And so when we were pulling the colors, what I found intriguing is some of the colors we found very much matched a copper patina color, which would have been a key thing that he would have done because all of the copper on the roof would have turned to that color. And you see that right here. We found that in a few spots, and we think it's very appropriate. So one of the things that we liked about this color combination that we were pulling together is much more harmonious. The transition between the light and the dark colors is not as drastic, and the bay windows that are painted kind of have this candy cane Disney feel a little bit. And I think with these colors, it's a little more subtle. It's not a bright white, it's an off-white. I just think that they're a little bit more elegant and refined, and probably, to me, feel more of the era of 1917 than the Vinci colors that were found. We're also finding that the stucco color was not that gray, that it was a whitewashed in our sampling and getting back down to the finish. So even in some of the early photos, the building kind of has this white, but a soft white feel to it. And right now, I think it's just a little, the blue is just, it doesn't feel as authentic as I think the greens that we're finding, and also the accent color. I think you notice it a lot when you look at the Marshall Fields building, because that's actually painted quite well to what the original was. Probably because it was under one owner for such a long time, the color wasn't changed as much. So that's what I think you'll see, as a shopper, it's just a more harmonious look.
Thank you. Tell me about the awnings. Are the awnings, I know that they're not part of the request, but are you planning to leave the existing awnings? Will they change over time? Is there a different color that they would gravitate to because of this paint color selection, or would they just remain? What is there?
The awnings are another thing that we're doing a lot of research on. What you see out there is multiple layers of awning age. They're all over the place, and we'd like to try to create some sort of cohesive idea for what the awnings should be. And also we've seen numerous, like you see in this image, they're white with a very thin stripe. But they're not everywhere. These are taken at the same time, and there's awnings and there's no awnings. You see some here. So we're trying to figure out the best way to handle the awnings, and in all honesty, it's something we're still doing a lot of research on. We're trying to hit the elements that we know we want to get done this season. And the storefronts, the awning, and the signage are kind of a difficult nut because they've seemed to have morphed over the ages, whereas everything from here up has seemed to kind of stay true to its original design. So it's a lot easier for us to kind of do the research, come up with the documentation. But I do know that we're looking into, the awnings. I do know that these colors, because we've walked out there ourselves to kind of compare and contrast, and we feel that these colors kind of lend themselves to some of the awning colors that you actually see out there with the darker greens and the blacks and the whites and the beiges and the gold. So we feel that this will probably be a more harmonious look with the awnings that are out there, as well as just a a broader look for the whole area, since there seems, the darker green is kind of used quite often. We're not that same dark green, but we're in that family.
So can you walk us through you had a drawing up before that showed what color, thank you.
So basically, there's a 3-color system that's originally there now. There's a white, a brown, and a green. There's a few accent colors that we found. For example, Marshall Fields is this color. We found this over in the Einstein Building and the Griffith Block in a few spots. Some of the cast iron detailing is a different color. And then this, when we were sampling colors, there was kind of 2 whites. A majority of them were this, but there were a few this color. And we felt that that was a nice accent where we had the bays that are a single color. Would be nice to have a 2-tone to help accentuate the trim. So in general, what you see here is wherever you see an existing white as it stands now, so windows and eaves are this color. Where you see the brown, it's the half timber, the eaves and the fascias, and the green is the trim and the bays. And we will be painting below the second floor the matching color, so we don't have a winter of clashing blues and greens.
Thank you.
I'm concerned about the lighthouse landing color. That's going to be billed to be pretty yellow. I'm concerned about it clashing with the stone of the Marshall Fields building. Do you want the stucco to look that golden?
The stucco color we haven't completely determined, but it is the original.
I thought the lighthouse yellow was going to be the stucco color.
No, this is the windows and eaves, and it's
Okay.
actually matches historically what's there. It's not too far off.
Okay, so you don't know the stucco color?
The stucco color, originally, we were going to go with the matching gray that was painted there when we did our presentation, but we're finding that the stucco color was not originally a gray, but was a lighter color, and we're in their process of getting samples for those colors. But it was a whitewash. We can see the color underneath. It's like a light white tan. It's probably lighter than this, but not too far off from that color. And these colors work really beautifully with the existing stone that's there. Although the Marshall Fields building has no stucco on it. So
No, I know that, yeah.
So the Marshall Fields facade is mostly stone, and it's the dark green. The eaves are this color right here. And it's actually fairly close to the color that we found historically. So the Marshall Fields kind of was more true to what it's painted now and remaining. It was the North and South Market Square that tended to deviate.
So you're describing a stucco color that's almost the same color as the limestone, or is it lighter than the limestone?
It's somewhere in between because the limestone is fairly light. But it was painted, as you can see from the Vinci, the Glidden, the gray. We've been stripping the paint off to do the restoration work and discovering that there was a brown coat with a whitewash over it. It was never a finish coat.
Well, I think it would look great as a lighter color.
So we believe it should be a lighter color, and we're getting it's one of the things we're having Tony come back and sample, because we can see it. It's not a white because there's a white prime. It's definitely a beige. I had my color chips out there, and I said, oh my goodness, it's really close to the original white that we're finding on all the windows. And it would be a nice contrast because we're taking the paint off the limestone sills that are now gray and putting them back to their original limestone color, which is a nice warm beige. So the tones that we're looking for are in that beige tone. They're not in that bright white.
Okay, one more question. I noticed that you were talking about you were developing guidelines for future
Yes.
preservation and maintenance.
Correct.
Any way we can participate in that with you?
I could see no reason why not.
I just think it might be helpful because, especially with the awnings and the signage, we've been through that so many times. We might have some input for you.
We applaud the
The
efforts.
awnings and
Yeah.
signage and storefront, all of that is a later phase. So
I'm just
we probably
putting it
don't
out
even want to
there. It
get
might be
into
helpful
awning
for-
colors today, but yes, those
Yes.
guidelines will come before you.
Good, because it
Just
might
trying
help
to
you
get
with
through
all our
these phases
historic
first.
all our
But if you feel like
past
taking a
history.
poll, Susie would be happy to get on the phone.
Yes,
with you.
I know with the storefronts and awning and signage, it's something that we definitely need to do a lot of work and more research and even talking with Kathy, more involvement from different folks to kind of understand where we need to be.
There's probably
and-
10 meetings you can see tapes of where we probably learn a lot from that process.
And the,
Anyway,
and the key with our preservation document is when we're all done, we'll have everything really well documented so that when maintenance occurs, the right thing is done to the stucco. And as we're discussing all of these, we're talking about, okay, we're doing with the stucco, in 2 or 3 years it cracks, how do they do the restoration? And we've been thinking about that in terms of how we're choosing what we're doing so that the maintenance won't be delayed and will just keep occurring.
Great.
That's the intent with the restoration, is to make sure there's a great packet of information for the management staff. There is some of that now, but I think at some point it wasn't really followed, but documenting the paint colors, documenting exactly where it's colored, exactly how to handle the stucco, the slates and the gutters, et cetera. We've got the masonry. The good news is the mortar and the masonry we've got it spot on. And we have all that information, so going in the future, it'll be easy for someone to come in and do the right tuck pointing to match the Shaw look. So it was very encouraging that a lot of what we were finding was occurring quickly and simply so that it wasn't going to be a problem later.
Well, and that's a living document too. I mean, it'll change as you go along, and the key is to keep updating it, right? I mean,
Correct.
Right, so, okay.
Other questions?
Yeah, I have a question for you. I think you guys did a really nice job articulating the criteria that you think you've met based on the scope of the project, given our 17 guidelines. And I think it seems like through the discussion, I guess the resistance point or the questions at hand are around the double hung replacements. And I was just curious if you could just maybe walk through how the double hung replacement scope of the project is compatible with the 17 criteria that we have to apply. And I can walk them up to you.
Okay, yes.
And the three
I
that
think
you-
a lot of them,
Well, let me just finish.
Yeah.
And so the ones that you mentioned, and I think thoughtfully, was 12, which was preserving distinguishing features. I'm not going to answer the question for you.
correct.
And 15 was, to repair deteriorated features. So our default, just based on, the ordinance, is that these architectural features that have deteriorated shall be repaired rather than replaced whenever possible. And if necessary, then the new strategy would need to be, kind of match the sight lines, et cetera, et cetera.
Correct.
So I think that's kind of the key issue. And then the surface cleaning, what you mentioned isn't really, it's obviously you're going to take care to do that. So I was just curious if you could just give us the case before public comment and our deliberation around how the double hung replacement kind of jives with those from your opinion, and you can pull in Ann too.
I think how it jives with our opinion is, we looked at it trying to meet the first criteria of restore in place. We did a fair amount of research. We did detailed drawings and thought out consistently how we were going to handle it and brought in experts to kind of give us pricing and quotes and understanding. We felt that to keep the historic integrity, that if we had to do something in this space that would be a replacement, we would be replacing it as sympathetically as we could find in terms of the overall historic sight lines and views. We felt that was the spirit of what the ordinance would want us to do when we find that it's very hard to restore the physical, and that we would replace with an in-kind look, focusing on the architectural sight lines because of the historic significance of the architect who designed it originally and the overall impact when it's complete.
And I would just add that if you look at the Shaw design overall, when you're looking at the key significant design elements or features, of which there are many, and you can start with the storefronts that aren't really part of the project tonight, but you have you have wood, you have ornamental cast iron, you have ornamental wood carvings at eaves and roof lines, you have multiple colors of blended slates. There are a lot of things that give the character to the building, and the variety of shapes in terms of pitched roofs and eaves and decorative scupper boxes. And I would say that these windows are not a key decorative feature. It's not, they are a fairly utilitarian window. And the key ones that have design elements are those that you find in the at Marshall Fields and in the towers, and those are intended to be restored. And the more utilitarian windows that are not really a key architectural design element are being proposed to be replaced in kind and matching the materials and profiles so that it is wood for wood. And I say that because I know commissions often are looking at replacements in metal clad or something else, and this is wood for wood.
Sure. Thank you.
Thanks.
That's very helpful. That would have been good to lead off with, I think. I'll ask if there's any more questions. I see none, so I will now ask if there's any. Now's an opportunity for the public to comment, if there's any public comment. I see none, so now we can deliberate. Other deliberations?
I'll deliberate if you want. I'll do it quickly.
Go for it. No, you take your time. I just wanted to get
So,
to the question and answer period.
Great. So I should say that I'm very familiar with the historic double-hung windows on the south elevation of North Market Square. That's the north part. Having spent much of my waking hours within a foot or two of them for about 9 years. So I think I have a real appreciation for the quality of these windows as functional windows. So on the one hand, we have their quality as functioning windows. On the other hand, as a member of the commission, one of the things I do to try to educate myself is I get textbooks on historic preservation and I read them. And one thing that seems pretty clear to me is that whether it's from the standpoint of the Department of the Interior standards or our 17 guidelines or in general what historic preservationists think, the stronger philosophical bent is towards maintaining historic property rather than replacing it with new property. And so what we're talking about here, obviously, is replacing a significant amount of historic property, historic elements with new elements. Taking everything together, I think I understand now, which I didn't understand before the meeting, that in fact you are intending to replace all of these. And it appears to me that there are significant, obviously significant, utilitarian benefits to doing that in terms of functionality of these windows. But there are also significant, very significant aesthetic concerns about that. And so the only thing I really have to say, apart from what I've said already, is that I think I would suggest to the other commissioners that perhaps as part of any approval of this petition, there should be a provision for there to be a subcommittee to approve the very specific replacement windows which you will propose to put in place. And that subcommittee include people, I mean, we have people obviously who have real refined aesthetic judgment about these windows, which I do not. And that's my thought.
Okay. Any other deliberations?
Yeah, I have some thoughts. I also spent a fair amount of time in an office up there, and it gets to are the double hung windows preserving a distinguishing feature of the structure? And to me, the role of our commission and the reason why the ordinance was put in place was to stop large mistakes from happening on critical assets in our community that are of historical consequence. And we always have to balance the modernization of structures, whether it be kitchen expansion or demolition or just putting structures into the modern age around energy efficiency. So it's always a balance, it's never one way or the other. And preservation, if it goes too far, can be its own worst advocate. So I think on balance, I'm in support of this. Even if you just looked at the criteria that we have to deliberate, I think the 3 that they mentioned are appropriate. I think the other one was 11, which is the directional expression of the front elevation is being maintained. There's really not a large impact there. And I think on balance, the double hung windows, while I spend time next to them, I think they are utilitarian. I don't think they're distinguishing features. I don't think our community will, the character of Market Square, our community will really shift if they're replaced and matched with material and sightlines. But that's just my opinion. I guess the second point I'll make is, as a body, are we the policemen for the last mile in terms of designing the elements and then making sure that the city staff and the project is put in place? And in relation to the replacement windows and having to get involved in that, I could see the efficacy of that for some. I think personally, I put a lot of stock in the city and their ability to do this. I don't think anybody's going to want a deviation from what we talk to here and approve, and the intent versus the reality. So I could live with that or without it.
Okay. Any other?
I would have to vote no on this, just based on the fact solely that I haven't seen the new window, and descriptions, vary greatly, and it would be crazy to say yes to 100 windows without having seen the rough design. But the bigger issue to me is the colors you've chosen. I feel as though the new colors are just sort of typical. They're just a typical Tudor hunter green and beige and cream and brown. And as I've brought friends over the years to Lake Forest, that bizarre, quirky blue-green color that we have currently, I think is unique. And I think it's made this Tudor square sort of different. And I think that's almost sort of our signature, it's become sort of our signature color. And I hesitate just to make it just a typical Tudor hunter green and brown with some beige.
If I may just clarify, these weren't colors we selected. These were the colors that were there historically, based on historic analysis.
Thank you.
Yeah, however, in everyone's recent memory, I feel like this sort of has become the Lake Forest color that we're all sort of comfortable with. I truly like it, and I hate to see it go. That's just my thought.
Well, I'll jump in. The windows is really a tough one because, we're always about, oh my gosh, the first thing you think about, especially in a residential petition, is to save the windows, and you're always talking about getting some historic designation. It's always about the windows. I find it intriguing to think about a subcommittee, and maybe that would satisfy everyone's issues about the windows if we could actually maybe see them. And because, as you said, it's kind of an evolving issue, even for you. And maybe that would alleviate some of the concern. I totally understand, the reason for that. And it's really illuminating to me to hear that these were just utilitarian and they were not that high quality. And you're right, it's not the distinguishing feature on the square, but yet this is our most important historic property in Lake Forest. So to alleviate some of our concern, maybe that would help. I don't want to slow your project down, but it just, you want to get over that hump. That's a big hump. In terms of the colors, I think it's fabulous what you did in terms of trying to find the historic colors. And, I know we have some comfort with that blue, but it's more teal to me. And you're right, it is really unique, but yet it always has seemed it seemed to get brighter as the years went on to me. And so
It has.
yeah, so I'm very supportive of the colors. I love how you've researched that, and that's really key, especially if we're talking about historic restoration here. So I just thank you for all your effort on this. This is amazing to me, the amount of effort and work you're all doing on this, and I really appreciate the care and concern for this property, but I'm thinking maybe that subcommittee might be the way to go. I don't know.
What do you think, Bob?
Well, I guess I have more comfort level with the replacement windows because I've seen quite a few National Historic buildings that have kept their rating with new build, that people are capable of doing that and making them look like they were the old windows. So I'm very comfortable with that, but I would also be fine if people wanted to see a mock-up. I have no objection to that.
Can I ask the petitioner if they have any comments with respect to a mock-up? And I think the proposal would be to see both colors and a window installation in a typical setting so that we could understand how those look in the field. And I think, frankly, one of the kind of problems for us is this is the first time we've seen the colors, so we haven't had a chance to see them out in the field. And there's also quite a bit of this project that, continues beyond the scope of this project. So paint colors that are, on adjacent buildings that have picked up, these colors or some kind of variation of these colors. So it would be interesting to be able to have the paint colors in our hand and walk around the square and see or try to understand what the impact to the surrounding buildings are, particularly Lake Forest Bank, I think, is a very, sympathetic kind of paint color. The project that's behind the Marshall Fields, the Northgate building on your plan is, I think, those same John Vinci colors. So what do you think of that? Is that something that would be embraced if we were to add that as a condition?
We would always invite any of you to be part of both conversations. We are on a schedule, so we'd ask that the subcommittees for both separate or together are developed sooner rather than later, and are invited to be part of the conversation sooner rather than later. But of course, and all the other things like keeping you in the loop with the guidelines on maintenance, we're for it. We're for all of this. I think you can see that with our team.
Yeah.
But we do want to make sure we stay on track here, on schedule, and make sure we don't have scaffold in downtown Lake Forest for 5 years. So.
Appreciate that. Thank you very much. I'll add my comments here. First of all, I think that it's an interesting photo that's up on the wall. We've got the Griffith Block building with non-historic windows that have been replaced in there. And none of these windows look that great to me. And the reason is because they're all covered with storm windows and the sashes are up and down in different positions. I think that if we lost the storm windows and these were replaced with divided light windows that were convincingly similar to the original windows, I think we'd all probably feel much better about the way the building looked. Maybe you probably wouldn't even perceive it, but because it's up in the air high, you'd have to go looking for it. But we would all go looking for it, right? So I think that can be done well, and I would like to see this specific window. I agree with everybody else in terms of the work. This is a great project, and we all look forward to the continued investment and improvement, and can't wait to have all the awnings match. That'd be great. So with all of that, I guess I would see if someone would like to craft a motion. Any other comments before I ask if someone wants to craft a motion?
Well, do you guys want to do one subcommittee? I mean, I would
think
say
it should
one.
be- I
Just
think it should be one,
get
and
involved.
I think that what I'd like to do, I'd like to, unless you guys feel differently about it, I'd like to talk with Kathy about who that should be, and
Yeah.
if you'd leave that to Kathy and I to determine, I think that would be helpful. But I would welcome any participant that wants to volunteer.
And I would
their
just
time on that.
mention that actually condition number 1 that's recommended, it did recommend review of a mock-up with the chairman, so that could just simply be modified to have it be a subcommittee, which would actually be 2 members of the commission.
Right.
Great.
We can only have 2, by the way.
Can only be 2.
All right, so we'll make that modification to your condition, and I'll ask if someone wants to make the motion.
I framed one if you wanted.
Thanks, that'd be great.
Based on the findings detailed on the applicable staff report dated July 23, 2014, which document that the project complies with the standards in Chapter 51, Historic Preservation of the City Code, and incorporating the materials submitted and presented by the petitioner, and the testimony and the deliberations of the commission at this public meeting as additional findings, I move that the commission grant a certificate of appropriateness approving Phase 1B of the restoration of Market Square as detailed in the submission materials dated July 16, 2014, and in the presentation made by the petitioner at this meeting, and that the commission condition its approval on the condition of approval is enumerated under the numbered paragraphs 1 and 2 on page 4 of the applicable staff report, and the additional conditions that the petitioner present for approval its final plan for the color scheme and the replacement of the historic double-hung windows on the second floor of each elevation to a subcommittee of this commission designated by the chairman.
All right, the motion's been made by Commissioner Travers. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Commissioner Preschlack. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Nay.
One opposed. So you passed. Congratulations with that. Good luck, and we look forward to the mock-up and appreciate all the work on this important building. Thank you much.
Thank you.
All right, we have one more agenda item for this evening, I believe. It is a consideration of a request for a certificate of appropriateness approving a new greenhouse located at the west of the existing farm buildings at Ellowa Farm. I'll ask if anyone has any conflict on this one, and I see none. No farmers in the room. So introduce yourself and let us know what you got when you're ready.
Good evening, Commissioners. I'm Diana Melikar of Melikar Architects, and I'm here to present tonight on behalf of Ellowa Farm Foundation. Also tonight are Bob Shaw and Joanne Miller. Joanne Miller is the Executive Director, and Bob Shaw is the President of the foundation. So the Ellowa Farm Foundation would like to build a new head house and greenhouse at Ellowa Farm to serve our community. I have a cold tonight, so I hope I can talk through here. Here are some images of Ellowa Farm buildings. Ellowa is a gentleman's farm complex built in the Georgian colonial revival style and designed by New York architect Alfred Hopkins in 1917. Ellowa Farm's caretaker's residence was designed by David Adler in 1920. As you can see in these images, Ellowa's gentleman's farm architecture is rural in character, as the buildings are designed to be both practical and artistic. The ensemble of buildings and its associated gardens represents a multifaceted success story of revitalization and community involvement. For over a decade and a half, creative direction was set forth by Mr. Robert G. Shaw as developer of Middle Fork subdivision to revive this farm complex. Subsequent public-private financial partnerships with the city, generous private donors, and the Ellowa Farm Foundation facilitated the preservation, rehabilitation, and adaptive reuse of a neglected property that was once in disrepair. Today, the Ellowa Farm buildings serve our residents and community at large for ongoing educational and nature programs provided by the Ellowa Farm Foundation, as well as events such as weddings and special occasion celebrations. Full and part-time Ellowa staff, in addition to scores of community volunteers, proudly work together to make this once-forgotten property a vibrant asset for today's residents and our future generations. The addition of a head house and greenhouse will help to enrich Ellowa's market and garden activities by providing Ellowa Farm with the ability to grow its own flower, vegetable, and herb starts on-site as needed to fill its vegetable fields and cutting tiers. In addition, the greenhouse will allow potted flowers and houseplants to grow year-round rather than only during the outdoor growing season. Now I will review the site planning and building design. This is the roof diagram of the Ellowa Farm buildings. The Ellowa Farm buildings are organized around outdoor paddocks, gardens, and the central wagon court. The large building ensemble on the right side of this image includes the original main barn and its associated support structures to the east. The building ensemble on the left side of this image includes the western support structures for the main barn building, such as the wagon shed building and the separate caretaker's residence. You'll also notice 3 circles on the left that indicate the more recently added outdoor animal cages of the Wildlife Discovery Center. In the center of the image is the wagon court. The wagon shed on the left is flanked on the south by the potting shed, and on the north by the ice house. The Aloha Farm Foundation would like to locate the proposed greenhouse and head house just to the west of the existing potting shed. The existing potting shed is presently used as the Aloha Farm Foundation's principal conference and meeting room. The proposed head house will be used to teach small classes in the cultivation of seedling plants for the greenhouse and to host other educational events. Adjacency to the existing potting shed is ideal for overflow activities from the proposed head house. This location to the west of the potting shed also has historic precedent, as a greenhouse was once located in the same footprint. This is a plan image of the Aloha Farm building complex prior to the restoration and rehabilitation of the farm. The original 1917 Aloha Farm complex presumably did not include a greenhouse. However, Melakar Architects prepared a physical condition building survey in 1998 for the city of Lake Forest prior to the city's purchase of the property. And this is the drawing that we prepared for that survey. As indicated in gold color on the plan, in 1998 there existed a dilapidated greenhouse attached to the potting shed that extended southward toward the caretaker's residence. There was also evidence in 1998 that another greenhouse with a full basement had extended to the west from the potting shed, but the above-ground structure was demolished prior to our preparing the building survey. Here are images of the southward greenhouse. As you can see in the lower image, the greenhouse was in miserable condition in 1998, and it has since been demolished. However, the historic photos above provide design precedents for our proposed greenhouse. Note the half-height masonry wall that matches the farm's brickwork and the pleasing curved glass eave condition. Here you see the historic photo of the greenhouse addition that extended westward from the existing potting shed. Its design is not nearly as pleasing as the southern greenhouse design. This is an aerial image of the proposed site plan. After considerable study, Aloha Farm Foundation decided to locate the proposed head house and attached greenhouse in the former location of the demolished western greenhouse. The foundation took into consideration not only their desired building uses and the site's historic precedent, but also current space constraints created by other tenants of Aloha Farm, such as the Wildlife Discovery Center and the Max Shevitz Memorial Garden. With the new greenhouse and head house building in place, the only proposed adjustment to the existing western building site arrangement will be the relocation of the existing animal cages. They will be relocated to the south of the current animal viewing walking trail. You can see them on the bottom of the image there. Here is an image of the head house and greenhouse floor plan. The head house, as shown on the right, is a small potting shed that covers access to the greenhouse, which is shown on the left. The head house serves several functions. It prevents loss of heat from the greenhouse in the winter months. It provides space for potting and transplanting plants year-round, and it provides workspace for Aloha's ongoing educational classes. The classroom of the head house is sized at 13 feet by 20 feet clear floor space, plus the mechanical and storage closets. The proposed greenhouse will have an approximate footprint of 20 feet by 61 feet. This greenhouse size should satisfy the foundation's envisioned capacity for programming and its year-round needs for Aloha Farm's market and garden operations. This is an image of the proposed greenhouse and head house in context with the existing potting shed. The potting shed's south elevation is on the right, the head house is in the middle, and the greenhouse is on the left. To remain consistent with the farm's building language, the proposed head house is designed similarly to the existing potting shed in form, ridge height, and roof slope, materials, scale, and detailing to provide architectural balance on site. Here are the exterior elevations of the proposed head house and greenhouse building. As you can see, this building will maintain a low profile similar to all other Aloha Farm buildings. The curved eave upper glass portion of the greenhouse will be provided by a greenhouse manufacturer, while the lower portions of the walls of the greenhouse will be brick capped with limestone sills. Such a design will defer to Aloha Farm's architectural aesthetic while providing modern features needed for a fully functional greenhouse, including an insulated greenhouse glass panel system, and a climate control system with automated fans, vents, heating and cooling systems, etc. This concludes our presentation. We hope you will support the Eloah Farm Foundation's request. Their desired greenhouse and head house building structure will enrich their community programs in a way that respects Eloah Farm's existing historic architecture and land planning principles. A sensitive and minimal addition to the farm ensemble can, in turn, foster continued stewardship of this most treasured City of Lake Forest property. Thank you.
Thank you. Kathy, do we have a staff report?
Thank you, Chairman Peretz. Having walked this property in 1997, parking right near Waukegan Road and walking down what was really a gravel path, two tire tracks, and really finding the farm buildings. Others knew they were back there. I hadn't been back there before, and finding them open, uncared for, covered with vegetation, goats wandering around. It really still amazes me today that this is Eloah Farm and it's a community center. There were many times when we weren't sure it was going to happen. There were a lot of partners that came together. And I know even when the city took this over after Diana's firm did do the historic assessment, there were many people who shook their heads and wondered what would ever become of it. So what's there today is really incredible, and the restoration that has occurred. There were a couple buildings to the west of the existing westernmost row of buildings that were lost, unfortunately. I think what we're seeing here is bringing some of that back. There was a silo that I valiantly fought for and lost that, and the chicken coop was also lost. We did see the greenhouse that was there, and it was, as Diana said, it was in dilapidated condition. But this is one of those projects that people in this community had a vision and came together and really made it happen. You do have in your staff report a review of the 17 conditions, 17 standards that you are charged with considering, and we do believe that the greenhouse does meet those in design and scale, in compatibility with the existing buildings. I will note that your review, as everything with Eloah, there are many parties involved and it's been somewhat complicated. So your review tonight really does focus on the greenhouse, the design, the scale, the appropriateness of it. Although the area west of the wagon shed has been identified as a location for a building to be restored, we are also in the process of amending the master plan for Eloah, which will call this location out more specifically and will specifically address the relocation of some of those, the Wildlife Discovery Center cages and how that will happen. But what is before you tonight is the design, the scale, the proposed new structure, and staff does recommend approval. I would suggest that you might want to, just to make it clear, add a third condition that acknowledges that prior to the issuance of any permits for this new structure, that the amendment to the Eloah Farm Master Plan does need to be moved completely through the process. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Kathy. I'll ask if there's any questions from the commissioners.
I have one. Oh, sorry.
Oh, that's right.
I have a question about the design of the west elevation. I think this is a lovely project. But I just, I'm wondering about just that particular design. I'm wondering why you chose to add brick.
This is actually the house beyond. So
This is
you're
the
looking,
west,
you're looking there.
this west
is-
elevation photo.
This brick is that brick. So this, you're looking here.
I'm looking here. Oh, okay.
Got it?
Okay, yes. I still have a question
It's a
about it.
little
Okay,
weird.
yes, it is weird. Okay, because I was going to say that does look strange. I needed some clarification on that, which you just clarified. I'm wondering why those doors were chosen. What were your thoughts behind those doors?
You mean on you're looking at the west
Yeah, I'm
elevation?
looking at the west elevation.
Those specifically were sized so that way they can get carts in and out with plant materials.
Okay.
And that's part of the greenhouse manufacturer system. So the whole idea of using that greenhouse, the greenhouse that sits on top of the brick base, came about for several reasons, but the main reason is that we wanted to make sure that the operations were really functional and worked well. And greenhouse manufacturers have basically scientifically figured out how to grow plants in the best conditions. And so they have specific dimensions for almost everything in their growing. You know, it's something that's created for agricultural use. And so it was important that we have those specific criteria for the greenhouse.
There isn't another and a more attractive option for those doors? Is it that kind of door and that kind of door only?
Yeah, and it's interesting because I thought I covered all the bases on the presentation tonight, and then I thought, oh, geez, we should have gotten you a picture of what these greenhouses look like, because they look much better than my elevation. We rendered it to show the glass as being blue, but they're essentially transparent, and you can see the plants inside. So those glass doors are part of the system of the greenhouse, and we wouldn't want to make them solid. Certainly.
I was looking at the historic image, it just, on the lower right of the historic photos.
Can you go to the historic photos?
And I just felt like there was so much opportunity to sweeten it up a little bit. On the top right,
we're pretty
a
sure
finial
that
at the top and the end. There were just so many small details, I think, which
right.
would
We're fairly sure that that's also a prefabricated greenhouse from that time period.
Okay.
They just don't offer anything like that today. So we're trying to marry the aesthetic of the farm with also, the utilitarian nature of the farm.
Right.
And trying to make it as functional as possible.
So Diana, the new greenhouse would have a similar vented kind of roof like that, is that right?
Right. It's almost exactly the same, except that, there's no hood on the
Sure.
over the door that you see in the top right image.
right.
The spacing of the
And it has double doors. They want a double instead of single for, in terms of use.
Yeah. And in terms of the spacing of the mullions, the vertical mullions, what you've drawn is representative of what the actual manufacturer would be.
Correct.
Okay, thanks.
And it's fairly similar, actually, to the one that's on
This one's a
the
little
right,
narrower on
except
the
other
end.
than,
Yeah, this is a little narrower on the end, but I understand the challenges.
I just have one more question. I just wanted to make sure that the roof line of the existing potting shed and the head house are identical. The eaves are identical and everything is.
they are.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
The ridge
You
and
can't
eaves.
tell from
What
the
we did was
photo.
we essentially went out there and site measured and got all those conditions.
Great.
And then we utilized those
There
in our
wasn't
new
a
design.
section, so I couldn't tell. Okay, thank you.
What's the floor? Is the floor just concrete or is?
Yes. Well, you mean in the greenhouse or in the?
In the greenhouse.
There's been discussion back and forth of concrete, but also potentially gravel in areas because they use it for drainage, but
Sure.
it's probably going to be concrete.
Just curious.
Question.
Sure.
There was also, just so you know, Kurt, there was also discussion that maybe it might be heated, in the
That'd be cool.
Just a couple of questions on the materials. The old pictures, is the greenhouse framing going to be white?
We were planning clear tempered glass and then white for the
Framing?
framing.
And have you been pretty successful finding a match for the old brick?
We haven't gone there yet, but I would just say that we're very good at matching. We're really, really picky, our firm is. So eventually we'll find something and we'll get it right. So, we've even had masons where they come to us and we always ask for a mock-up, and they'll do a mock-up and we're like, it's the wrong, it might be the right size color, but the brick was off in shape by, 5/8 of an inch in one direction or something. And they're like, are you kidding me? So we'll get that right.
Yeah, it's the color that's usually hard because sometimes clay pits are no longer being
Right,
used. And
right.
trying to get
Sometimes
that
we're
same-
looking for it in reclaimed locations, where they tear down a building and
Okay.
they find it, yeah.
I have a question for staff. I can ask. Kathy, can you talk a little bit about the master plan? I may have missed a meeting or two, but was it developed by the same firm? When was it done? Is this consistent with it, or you had mentioned it needs to be changed? But I guess the only concern I would have on it would be that this structure would enable any further development in a, I guess, flawless way, consistent with the master plan, and that, future development and all that would be consistent. So just curious.
The master plan was developed through a collaborative effort. It was approved. It went through a process before the Plan Commission and City Council probably about, 3, 4, 5 years ago, something like that. And that really was, as the various uses were really becoming well established, and the special use permit was required because this property is zoned residential, and as our churches or other private clubs or the college or the hospital, this community retains the residential zoning and guides these types of special uses through that document. So at that time, the special use permit recognized the various educational, cultural uses out here, and talked about the different buildings, talked about what was permitted, what was not permitted, talked about special events, and identified locations, recognizing that there had been some other buildings, recognized locations for potential additional buildings. That master plan over the last 6 to 8 months has recently been revisited by the various groups who work out here, who are tenants out here, and really it's being refined. There's nothing being presented tonight that's inconsistent. There was always the contemplation that there could be an additional accessory structure, thinking about the structures that were removed, the greenhouse, the chicken coop and the silo, that there could be an additional new structure in this area. So it's really a plan that guides the current uses and the future development of this particular site.
And who is, that's your job to make sure they're consistent with the master plan, or is that part of our review that when we see a new building, we're supposed to make sure it goes along with the master plan?
Plan for evaluating consistency with the master plan is actually quite complicated because you have various groups. You have an Elua, and I might misspeak here, but you have an Elua Farm Commission, an Elua Foundation. There's a representative from the city manager's office who's involved in that. But yes, as projects would come forward for construction, they would come to the Community Development Department. We would first look at the master plan, evaluate whether they're consistent. If it's a new structure, we would bring it before this group, and then would go through the standard permitting process. So there's various checks and balances. The various tenants are communicated with throughout the process by the foundation and commission. So it's a very collaborative process. And again, it really goes back to the very beginning when the Lake County Forest Preserve, Lake Forest Open Lands, the city of Lake Forest really came together. I actually remember plans that had multifamily housing right where these preserved buildings are. So to know the series of plans that could have been and to see this, it really has been a collaborative process all the way through.
I have a question for you, Diana, in terms of there's a big hedge there now. And so obviously that's going to be removed, right? But it does provide screening for, from the parking lot and from the houses. So I know we're not reviewing landscape right now, but that's a significant part right now of that location. It's a huge hedge that kind of wraps around there in front of the cages.
So you're talking about the one that's right along the parking lot?
No, it's, you know what I'm talking about, right? It hides the birdhouses, or the cages from
that one.
view. So, and they're really mature. So, just wondering if that's, I guess you don't want to hide the house, but just wondering what's going to happen with those hedges.
Right. And I can't really answer that right now. I know that Craig Bergman's been involved with the foundation. Maybe Bob, do you want to go? or Joanne.
We will, during dormant season, ball, burlap, and move. We're not exactly sure where they're going to go, but we'll be pruning them and using appropriate horticultural standards to keep all of the landscape material that's there.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
And that brings me to the question too of moving those cages, because those are not simple cages. I mean, they've got electrical work, they've got plumbing. I mean, that's got to be a huge endeavor to move those. And plus they're big. And just wondering if you're moving them to the south property line, I mean, I'm not going to get into how huge that is because that's where you're going to figure out how to do that. But what about from sight lines from the neighbors? I mean, have you proposed that with the neighbors because there's all that big housing development south of there?
Yeah, I wish I had the overall neighborhood map that shows how far away this project is from all the neighboring properties. But in terms of where those animal cages were going to be located, again, the foundation was working in conjunction with landscape architects to figure that out. So that was given to me ahead of time and told that, this is where we'd like to move them. But it had to do, I know that there were a lot of criteria. Some of them had to do with the actual animals that were in the cages, that they wanted to make sure that they had more or less human interaction and a little more, I guess, privacy, if you want to call it that, for the animals. But I'm sure that they're going to be looking at that as well.
I would keep the
I know
screening
that they
in.
don't want to make any sort of eyesore there.
And I can respond that that is an issue that is outstanding as we go through the revised master plan. That revised master plan does acknowledge that the Wildlife Discovery Center encompasses that area, but we don't know exactly what the configuration of the layout of the cages will be. As I said, this is really just one piece of that larger discussion, so that is not resolved yet, exactly what will happen to the cages and how that will all happen. So that's yet to be resolved.
You think that would be captured by the condition that you've added about the master plan, that would be, okay.
Just screening for the, I'm just thinking screening for the neighbors.
Consideration
yeah.
for it in some way.
Any plans you have in front of you tonight that speak to the cages are not, the plans that you have in front of you should really be looked at specifically for the greenhouse and the head house.
Yeah, okay.
Other questions?
Oh, I had one other question. So this is your big event space, right? This is where you put up the tents. So is that going to impact your ability to use that space where?
That's one of the reasons that it's on, well, the main reason for the location is that it's next to the potting shed. So it's a real functional reason. But we did, basically the foundation came to us and they said, we've really studied this thoroughly, but as architects, we want your input too. So you tell us where you think the buildings should go. So we actually looked at several different options, but we ultimately felt as though this was the best location. And then the foundation came back to us and said, well, that's where we really wanted to have it too, but we wanted your opinion too. So the idea is that they still had that large lawn area that they can be having their events. And we know that on the other side is where that Max Shevitz Memorial Garden is and some of the wildlife discovery things. So we felt as though that was sort of a buffer between those two conditions of a little more use down on the southern side with that wildlife discovery and then the northern side near the parking lot. So.
Okay, thanks.
All right, any other questions?
I have one. Do you feel as though the east elevation might benefit from a window or two? I have this thing about expanses of solid brick, of uninterrupted brick. Yeah, I mean, did you think about?
I think in context, if you realize that it's sitting, it's about 20 feet away from the other. Let's go to the other one. Let's go to the one with the potting shed on the, yeah, here. These two elevations are actually talking to each other. There's another door on the potting shed, and they're
mirroring
right,
each other?
Right.
Okay.
And so what we have is for the on this where it says at the proposed head house in the middle, you can see there's 3 windows on the south side, and there's also 3 on the north, and then there's window of glass in the door on that east elevation. So at some point, there's sort of there's a rhythm of solid and void that we're looking at and sort of what the language was set up at the farm. And one of them is that on those gable ends, we have less glass than, let's say, on the sides with the, with the flat wall. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Any other questions? Now's an opportunity for the public, if there's any comments. Are there? I see none, so we can deliberate if we have any deliberations. Great project.
project.
We love seeing this stuff. Love talking about it, so we talk too long. But yeah, I mean, it's a utilitarian building, but it's part of a bigger complex and I appreciate the sensitivity to the existing buildings and all the logic on the placement. So I think it's great myself.
No, I agree. I think it's great thought, great placement. It seems to make sense on how the buildings are laid out, and giving you potential for another chicken coop on the other side could be another great courtyard. I mean, just the idea.
We
you
can
know.
design that for you.
Yeah.
Just joking.
Or a silo.
Or a silo, yeah, get the silo back in.
Anybody else? Al?
No, I think it's, I mean, Kathy's summed it up in terms of the transformation of the property from the, the late 90s. The other thing that always sticks in my mind, if you're ever worried about attention to detail at Eloa, do you remember when the petition for the signage came to us? We had all these ugly signs on Waukegan Road, and I mean, the entrance is just totally transformed. It's beautiful. I mean, it's just, you feel like you're transported back in time. And I feel like that a little bit when I walk through
It's beautiful.
the structure, because I just live up north from there. And and it's done such a nice job in terms of attention to detail and care for the facilities. And I think just, based on our criteria, this is really well thought out.
That's worth reinforcing. I mean, this is a group that we are giving wide latitude on selection of brick and mortar spacing.
Yeah, I
and
mean,
you've done such a wonderful job that we don't need to grade you on all that stuff because you've collectively all done such a wonderful job. So,
yeah, so no, I'm very supportive.
sorry, I jumped on top
No,
of your. All right, I'll ask if there's a motion.
I prepared one if you want it.
I'll love it.
Based on the findings detailed in the applicable staff report dated July 23, 2014, which document that the project complies with the standards in Chapter 51, Historic Preservation of the City Code, and incorporating the materials submitted and presented by the petitioner and the testimony and the deliberations of the commission at this public meeting as additional findings, I move that the commission grant a certificate of appropriateness approving a new structure comprised of a greenhouse and a head house as detailed on the plans presented to the commission for Eloa Farms, and condition its approval on the conditions of approval enumerated under numbered paragraphs 1 and 2 on page 4 of the applicable staff report, and completion of the appropriate amendment of the Eloa master plan.
All right, the motion's been made by Commissioner Travers. Is there a second?
Second?
It's seconded by Commissioner Swenson. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, congratulations.
Thank you.
Good luck with that.
Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you. All right, now is an opportunity for the public to address the Historic Preservation Commission on any non-agenda items, if there are any of those. Do I see any non-agenda items? I see none. Is there any additional information from the staff?
Chairman Peretz, I believe you declared that there will be no August.
I declared that there will be no August meeting.
Powerful.
I was looking forward to it.
Sorry.
Attaboy, Chairman.
So we will reconvene on our normally scheduled
During the
meeting
rest of
after
your summer.
August. Kathy will probably schedule 2 or something in September.
Yes.
All right, so I'll look for a motion to adjourn if there is one.
So moved.
Motion's been made. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded, and all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Thank you very much, and good night.
All right.